If you asked my dad where he was between 6 p.m. and 10 p.m. most weeknights for the past year, he'd shrug and say something like, out, with that brick wall smile he used when he didn't want to be questioned. My siblings and I joked about it at first. We're a sarcastic family. Everything is a bit. Out. Became a punchline. Dad, where's the remote? Out. Dad, where's my college fund? Out. But then it stopped being funny. The first real crack was the jacket. One Thursday in February, he came home late, jacket torn at the elbow, dusted with fine white powder. Mom asked if he'd been in a snowball fight with drywall. He kissed her cheek and said the stupidest thing, must have been windy, as if wind carries chalky residue. Then there was the money. Not missing, exactly, but displaced. Dad's a list guy. He writes down everything in a notebook that lives on top of the fridge. Suddenly there were gaps. No grocery entries for a week, but a series of ATM withdrawals in odd amounts. $37, $61, $19, like someone testing an old machine. When I asked, he said he'd settle it up later, which is not how a man who tracks toothpaste receipts talks. The neighbors chimed in. Mrs. Guzman said she'd seen Dad near the old train depot on Pine, carrying boards, which made no sense because Dad's never built anything in his life except an objectively unsafe treehouse in 1999. Mr. Patel mentioned Dad's sedan parked by the river after dusk, lights off. We tried to catch him in the act. My brother, Mark, followed one evening and lost him at a four-way stop when a delivery truck cut between them. He swears Dad knew he was being tailed because he took 3 right turns in a row like a spy who watches YouTube tutorials. When Mark got home, he had a picture on his phone, Dad at a gas station, talking to a man in a neon vest. And then there was the text on Mom's phone. Unknown number. Bricks delivered. Need tarp before rain. Mom showed me in the pantry with the door closed like we were trading state secrets. What is he doing with bricks? She whispered, as if bricks themselves could hear. The worst theories grew like mold. An affair. Gambling. Some side hustle that would torpedo our already delicate finances. Mom stopped sleeping. I started counting his missing hours. The night everything tilted, Dad came home early. 8:13 p.m. Coat zipped, hands scraped, a smear of blue across his knuckles like watercolor. He put his keys in the bowl and cleared his throat, that warning siren that meant a speech was loading. I need you all to come with me, he said, voice steady but eyes bright. Right now. We didn't know whether to laugh, cry, or grab our coats. The way Dad said it, calm, clipped, like a general about to march us into battle, didn't leave much room for debate. Mom, of course, tried. It's past 8, David, she said, standing in her slippers, arms folded. Where exactly are we going at this hour? He didn't answer, just handed her coat to her like a butler and gave the rest of us that stern dad eyebrow raise we hadn't seen since we were kids. It was surreal. Mark mouthed what the hell to me, but even he slipped his shoes on without another word. The drive was silent, except for Dad's old playlists humming from the stereo. No one asked out loud. We were all too scared the answer would shatter us. He pulled over in front of a chain-link fence with a padlocked gate. Beyond it loomed an enormous warehouse, half the windows smashed, roof patched with what looked like corrugated tin. Floodlights hummed in the corners, powered by some loud generator chugging nearby. Out, Dad said, and for a second I thought he was making a joke. He wasn't. The gate was already unlatched, as though waiting for us. Inside, the warehouse was transformed. Wooden frames lined one wall, fresh lumber stacked neatly in rows. Buckets of nails, coils of wire, rolls of insulation. The place looked like Home Depot had exploded. The scent of sawdust clung to the air. And everywhere, faint evidence of Dad. His old thermos on a work table, his faded baseball cap draped over a ladder. But it wasn't just construction supplies. Tucked in the corner was a row of tiny cots, child-sized, covered in donated blankets. Boxes labeled toys, books, clothes were stacked against the wall, some half open, revealing dolls and picture books. Mark whispered, "What the actual hell?" Dad turned to face us, wiping his dusty hands on his jeans. His expression was complicated. Proud, maybe. Nervous. Something like relief. "I've been working here," he said quietly. "Every night. For over a year." We waited. That couldn't be the whole story. Then the words landed. "I'm building a shelter. For kids." For a second, no one spoke. The silence was so thick I could hear the buzzing of the lights above us. Mom blinked hard, like she was buffering. A children's shelter? She echoed, voice sharp. You disappear for months. You lie to me. And you're building this? Yes. He straightened his shoulders. I couldn't tell you. Not yet. I had to make sure it was real first. I should have felt relieved. Instead, my heart slammed against my ribs because something didn't add up. The cots, the boxes of toys, the half-finished rooms, they all spoke of kindness, sure. But they also spoke of money, of planning, of dozens of hours no single man could manage. How? I asked, my voice too loud in the cavernous space. How could you build all this? Alone? That's when the door on the far side of the warehouse creaked open, and in walked two strangers carrying bags of cement. They looked about Dad's age, one tall and wiry with a shaved head, the other short and stocky with a limp that made every step uneven. Both wore the same neon vests Mark had spotted in his blurry phone photo. The tall one muttered, "You didn't say they'd be here." Dad raised a hand, calm but firm. "It's time. It's time." Two words that rattled in my skull. Time for what? Mom bristled. Who are these men, David? What in God's name have you dragged us into? The stocky one set down his bag with a grunt and extended a hand. I'm Luis. This is Rob. We work with your husband. Been at it since the start. At what? Mark snapped, stepping forward like he was ready to fight someone twice his size. Dad put a hand on his shoulder. At saving something no one else would. He gestured to the frames of rooms, the cots, the boxes. This place is going to be a refuge. Kids who don't have anywhere else. Foster system failures. Runaways. Even families in crisis. A safe bed. Food. Stability. I couldn't shake the thought that maybe Dad had been sucked into some underground cult of charity workers. Then Luis added, "We know because we were those kids once." Rob tugged up his sleeve, showing a faded scar that wrapped around his forearm. Group home. Nobody cared. He does. He nodded at Dad like he was pointing out a miracle. Mom pressed her hand to her forehead. You've been hiding this from us? Risking money we don't have, sneaking around at night, God knows what hours. Her voice broke. You could have been arrested, David. Dad finally looked her in the eye, jaw tight. I was arrested. Once. Trespassing, before I bought the lease. I didn't tell you because I couldn't explain without ruining it. My father, the man who lectured me about missing curfew, had a mugshot somewhere. Mark barked a laugh, too sharp. So you've got criminal charges and a secret construction gang. Great. Perfect. Totally normal. Luis stepped in then, surprisingly gentle. We're not criminals, kid. We're builders. Every nail in this place has been donated, every hour volunteered. Your dad started it, but he's not alone. And as if on cue, more footsteps echoed. The back door swung wider and half a dozen people filed in. A woman with paint in her hair, a teenager dragging a toolbox, a man balancing drywall on his shoulder. They nodded at Dad like soldiers reporting for duty. It wasn't just Dad's secret. It was an entire army of them. Mom staggered back, whispering, "What have you done?" But before Dad could answer, the sound of a car engine revved outside. Tires squealed, a spotlight from headlights slicing through the broken warehouse window. Rob muttered, "Not them again." The engine outside roared, cutting through the warehouse like thunder. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Luis swore under his breath and killed the generator, plunging us into semi-darkness. The floodlights winked out, leaving only slivers of moonlight through shattered panes. Mom clutched my arm. "What is happening?" Rob hissed, "Stay low." He motioned toward the cots, as if we were supposed to duck behind them like children. The car doors slammed. Heavy boots crunched gravel. Voices, two men, arguing. Why here again? Told you, they don't listen. Might as well scare him off for good. Dad didn't flinch. He walked toward the door, shoulders squared like a man who'd been through this routine before. "Stay," he said to us. Of course Mark didn't listen. He crept behind him, fists balled, as if he'd throw hands with whoever appeared. The warehouse door screeched open. In stepped two men. One tall, broad, with a beer gut straining against his blazer. The other thin as a scarecrow, eyes sharp and mean. Well, the big one drawled. "The family night tour." The thin one smirked. "Thought we told you, old man. This place doesn't belong to you." Dad stood his ground. "It doesn't belong to you, either. I've got the lease." That paper means nothing, the big man sneered. You think you can just take over prime riverfront property and turn it into a babysitting camp? We had plans. Plans. Mom's voice cracked from the shadows. For what? The scarecrow's smile widened. Storage. Development. Nothing you need to know about. His gaze flicked to the cots, the toys. Shame to waste good square footage on brats who'll trash it in a week. Mark exploded. You can't just. Dad's arm shot out, stopping him. You've made your point. Leave my family out of it. The big one laughed, a low sound. Family's in it now. And if you don't shut this down, you'll all regret it. Louise stepped forward, fists tight. Back off. We've got every permit, every donor on record. You lay a hand on this place, it's on you. But the men didn't look scared. They looked entertained. Permits, the thin one drawled. Funny thing about permits, they can disappear. The message was clear. These weren't just thugs. They had pull. After they finally left, tires screeching into the night, the silence was suffocating. Mom rounded on Dad, eyes blazing. You kept this from us because you knew it was dangerous. You knew. Dad's voice cracked, the first time all night. I knew it was worth it. I didn't know what to believe. My father wasn't just secretive. He was standing against people who clearly wanted him crushed. Rob rubbed his temples. We'll need more people. More eyes. They're not going to stop. And then, as if the night hadn't twisted enough, the teenager who'd been silent in the corner finally spoke. They're right about one thing, she said softly. This isn't just a shelter anymore. It's a target. Even after Dad drove us home, the echo of those men's voices lingered like smoke. I kept replaying the words, you'll all regret it, until they sounded like a curse. Mom stayed up pacing the kitchen, chain-drinking coffee while Dad sat at the table, hands clasped, eyes hollow. They didn't fight, not really. It was worse than that. They spoke in half-sentences, loaded silences, long stares that said everything and nothing. By morning, the fragile wall between Dad's secret life and our family had crumbled. Mark confronted him first. You can't just drag us into some war with developers or mobsters or whoever the hell those guys were, he snapped, slamming his hand on the table. You've been sneaking off like Batman, and now we're supposed to what? Pretend it's fine? Dad didn't rise to the bait. No, you're supposed to decide if you're with me or not. The words hit like a gut punch. With him or against him. Mom's voice shook. Don't you dare put this on us, David. You built this lie brick by brick. You shut us out. And now? Now we're supposed to risk everything without even being asked? He finally looked at her, and his face softened. I didn't want to burden you, or scare you, but I can't walk away from those kids. Not again. Again. I asked, my throat dry. That's when the real shock dropped. He told us about a boy named Caleb. A foster kid he'd mentored years ago, when I was too young to remember. Caleb had been in and out of shelters, always falling through the cracks. Dad tried to help, but the system swallowed him. Last year, Caleb overdosed under a bridge less than a mile from where we now lived. Dad went to the funeral alone, never said a word to us. I swore I wouldn't let another child slip through like that, he said, voice breaking. So I started building a place. A real one. Somewhere kids don't get forgotten. The kitchen was so quiet I could hear the refrigerator humming. For the first time, I saw Dad not as the secretive man sneaking out at night, but as someone carrying a grief he hadn't shared. Still, grief didn't erase the danger. 2 days later, the threat hit home. A brick came through our front window at midnight, scattering glass across the living room. Attached was a note scrawled in block letters. Close it down. Last warning. Mom screamed. Mark grabbed the bat he kept under his bed. Dad ran outside, but the street was empty except for a tail light glow disappearing at the corner. That was the breaking point. We couldn't pretend this was just his fight anymore. It had followed us home. The next morning, Mom made her decision. She walked into the half-finished shelter with us trailing behind and slammed a casserole dish down on the work table. If they're going to come after my family, she said, fire in her eyes, then I'll be damned if I don't help finish this place first. And just like that, the rest of us followed. Mark grabbed a hammer. I sorted boxes of toys. Even the dog laid claim to a dusty blanket in the corner like he belonged there too. The secret was no longer Dad's alone. The shelter was ours now. But with every nail we hammered, I couldn't shake the feeling that the people trying to stop us were planning something bigger. The day after Mom declared war with her casserole dish, things shifted. The shelter no longer felt like Dad's haunted project. it felt alive. With us there, voices echoed through the warehouse. Mark's sarcastic commentary about his hammering skills, Mom bossing around grown men twice her size, me organizing stacks of donated clothes until my hands smelled permanently of mothballs. For a brief window, it almost felt hopeful. But hope is fragile. On the third afternoon, a black SUV rolled up outside. No neon vests, no friendly volunteers this time. Out stepped the two men from before, the gut-heavy bruiser and his scarecrow partner. Only now they weren't alone. A third man climbed out of the back. He was sharp in a gray suit, no tie, every hair on his head perfectly placed. His presence made the others look like junkyard dogs on a leash. Dad stiffened. The suited man strolled toward us, polished shoes crunching gravel. "Mr. Carter," he said, addressing Dad like they were old acquaintances. "I was hoping it wouldn't come to this." Dad's jaw tightened. "You don't belong here, Price." Price. The name carried weight, like the kind of last name that showed up on law firm buildings and campaign signs. Mom stepped forward before Dad could stop her. "Who are you? Why are you harassing my family?" The man's smile was polite, even charming. "Ma'am, I assure you, this isn't personal. My clients have purchased development rights to this land. Condominiums, office space, revitalization, you understand. Progress. This land was abandoned," Dad shot back. "Nobody wanted it until I started building here." "Exactly." Price spread his hands. "Now it has value. And value attracts attention. Unfortunately, your project stands in the way of millions." The word millions sucked the air from the room. Price's tone never hardened, but his eyes sharpened like glass. "Walk away, Mr. Carter. Sell me the lease for a generous sum, and no one gets hurt." Luis barked a laugh. "Generous? You mean hush money?" Mark couldn't hold back either. "You threw a brick through our window. You think we're just going to roll over?" Price's polite smile never wavered. "Young man, you should be careful what accusations you make. My associates and I have very clean records." His gaze flicked at Dad. "Yours, however, isn't spotless. I believe you've already had one run-in with the law on this property?" Dad said nothing. Price took a slow step closer. "Imagine what would happen if building inspectors were suddenly very interested in your little charity, or if donors discovered your history." Finally, Price adjusted his cufflinks and turned back to the SUV. "You have 1 week. After that, we stop being polite." The three men left, gravel spraying under their tires. Mom turned on Dad immediately. "A week? What happens in a week, David?" He looked at all of us, face grim but steady. "It means we finish before then, or we lose everything." The volunteers exchanged nervous glances. Rob muttered, "1 week? We'll need an army." Mark cracked his knuckles, fire in his eyes. "Then let's build faster." I wanted to believe him, but deep down, I knew Price hadn't shown us his worst yet. The week that followed felt like a race against time. Every morning, the warehouse filled with bodies, volunteers hammering, painting, wiring. Mom became a commander, barking orders like she'd been running construction sites her whole life. Even I, who had never held a drill before, found myself measuring shelves and sanding edges until my arms ached. For a little while, the urgency gave us purpose. But then the accidents began. The first was the scaffolding collapse. Mark had been standing on the second tier, painting beams, when the whole structure lurched. He barely jumped off before it crashed to the floor, splintering into a heap of metal and wood. 2 nights later, a fire broke out. Nothing huge, but enough to scorch a wall of insulation and choke the air with black smoke. Someone had left a cigarette smoldering in a trash bin, though none of the regulars smoked. The worst was the theft. We arrived one morning to find boxes missing, blankets, canned food, even the donated toys. The lock on the gate had been cut clean, as if by bolt cutters. Dad stared at the empty space where the supplies had been and whispered, "They're trying to break us." But suspicion crept inward too. After all, the thieves had known what to take and where it was stored. Had someone inside helped them? One night, when I went to grab bottled water from the supply closet, I found Luis inside, crouched low, stuffing a backpack with cans. My stomach dropped. "What are you doing?" I blurted. He froze, eyes wide. For a heartbeat, I thought he'd make an excuse. Instead, he sighed, zipped the bag, and said, "Come with me. You need to see something." He led me out the back door, away from the others, into the cold night. Down the block, under the broken streetlight, sat a cluster of kids, 4 of them, maybe 12 to 15 years old. Skinny, dirty, eyes hollow. Luis handed them the bag. They tore it open like wolves, shoving food into their mouths without hesitation. "They've been coming here since we started," he said quietly. "Runaways. Foster kids who don't trust the system. I can't turn them away." I understood in that moment. The sabotage wasn't just coming from price. Some of it was desperation. Some of it was kids already depending on the shelter before it was even finished. But when I told Dad what I'd seen, his face went pale. If Price finds out children are already here, he'll use it against us. He'll call it unsafe, illegal. We're not ready yet. The secret weighed heavy. I didn't know if hiding those kids was protecting them or setting us up for disaster. And then, just as the tension reached its breaking point, something happened that made every scraped knuckle and sleepless night feel like it might have been for nothing. The city inspector showed up at the warehouse, clipboard in hand, 2 police officers behind him. Dad's face hardened, but he forced a steady tone. "Afternoon, gentlemen. To what do we owe the visit?" The inspector flipped a page on his clipboard. "We've received complaints regarding unpermitted construction, fire hazards, and potential squatting on city property." Mom stepped forward, chin high. "This is leased legally. We have documentation. Would you like me to pull the paperwork?" The inspector barely looked at her. "Documentation can be forged. We'll need to verify." The inspector started walking, making notes. "Electrical wiring is incomplete. Exposed beams here. Improperly stored flammable materials." His pen scratched like nails on a coffin lid. The inspector paused at the row of cots. He ran a finger over one of the frames, then looked at Dad. "And what exactly is this facility intended to be?" Dad hesitated. I could see the calculation in his eyes. If he admitted children's shelter without permits finalized, they'd shut us down instantly. But if he lied, it would come back to bite him later. Finally, he said, "Community Resource Center. Temporary safe space. All volunteer run." The inspector scribbled something, unreadable. Then came the moment that nearly unraveled everything. From the back door, a small voice piped up. "Mr. Carter? We're hungry." It was one of the runaway kids. A boy, maybe 13, barefoot, and clutching an empty juice box. He froze when he saw the cops, his wide eyes darting like a cornered animal. The room went dead silent. The inspector's pen hovered midair. "Children are already occupying the premises?" Dad stepped forward fast, shielding the boy with his body. "Temporarily. We don't turn away kids in need." The inspector's lips thinned. "That's not only a violation, it's endangerment. This structure isn't up to code." Mom's voice cracked like a whip. "Endangerment? You want to know what's endangerment? Letting kids starve in alleys while men like you nitpick about paint fumes." The cops shifted, uncomfortable. Even the inspector faltered for a second. Finally, he closed his clipboard. "I'll be filing my report. Expect a decision by week's end." When they left, the warehouse erupted. Volunteers arguing, some terrified, some furious. Luis paced like a caged tiger. Rob slammed a hammer into the workbench so hard the table shook. Dad sank into a chair, rubbing his face. "He's going to shut us down." Price made sure of it. But before despair could settle, the quiet teenager who had barely spoken all week raised her head. Her voice was steady, sharp. "Then we need to stop hiding. If the city shuts us down in silence, we lose. But if we show people what this place really is, if we let the world see, he can't bury it so easily." Her words hung in the air, dangerous and electric. It wasn't just about building anymore. It was about fighting back. The teenager's idea lit a fire none of us could ignore. Hiding hadn't protected us. It had only made Price stronger. So we flipped the script. Within 2 days, the shelter wasn't a secret project anymore. Mom called every church, school, and community group she could think of. Mark posted photos online of the cots, the food drive, the kids' drawings taped to the walls. I drafted a thread about Caleb, the boy Dad had lost, and how this place was meant to stop more kids from slipping through. It spread fast. Too fast. By the end of the week, local reporters were calling, and neighbors showed up with donations, bags of clothes, crates of fruit, even power tools. Volunteers doubled overnight. For the first time, the warehouse buzzed with more hope than fear. But Price struck back just as hard. Anonymous flyers appeared in mailboxes, branding Dad a criminal, calling the shelter unsafe for children. Online trolls flooded our posts with accusations. money laundering, cult activity, even trafficking. The smear campaign was ugly, and worse, effective. One night, Dad sat at the work table, scrolling through the mess on his phone. His shoulders looked heavier than any load of bricks. "They're trying to drown us," he murmured. But then a reporter showed up, microphone in hand, asking for a tour. And Dad, instead of hiding, stood tall and said, "Yes, come see." For the first time, I saw my father not just as a builder, but as a fighter. The reporter's story aired 3 nights later, and it changed everything. Footage of Dad showing the cots, of Mom handing out food, of Mark hammering crooked boards while cracking jokes. It all painted a picture no smear campaign could erase. The piece ended with Dad's voice. "Every child deserves a bed, a meal, and someone who won't give up on them." The city lit up. Donations poured in. Volunteers tripled. Churches, schools, and even small businesses rallied. Someone started a fundraiser online, and within 48 hours, the shelter had more money than it had ever dreamed of. Price tried one last move. He arrived at the warehouse with lawyers, waving cease and desist papers. But this time, he wasn't met with silence. He was met with cameras, reporters, and a crowd of neighbors chanting, "Let it stay." The look on his face when he realized he couldn't bully us anymore, that his polished smile cracked under public eyes, was the sweetest thing I've ever seen. His lawyers whisked him away before he said something damning, but the damage was done. 2 weeks later, the inspector returned, this time with no cops and no scowl. He walked through the now finished space, checked the permits, rushed through thanks to public pressure, and gave a reluctant nod. "You're cleared," he said, like the words tasted sour. The grand opening was a blur. Balloons, music, neighbors filling the space shoulder to shoulder. Kids running to claim the cots as if they were bunk beds in a magical fort. Parents crying with relief. Volunteers handing out plates of food like it was a feast. Dad stood at the front, hands clasped, voice trembling as he thanked everyone. Then he looked at us, at Mom, at Mark, at me. His eyes shone. "This was never mine alone," he said. "It's ours. It's this community's. And it will stand." Mom squeezed his hand. Her earlier fury melted into pride. Mark grinned, muttering, "Guess you're not Batman. You're something better." For the first time in months, the silence around Dad was gone. No more secrets, no more sneaking out. Just a man who'd carried a grief too heavy to bear alone, finally letting us carry it with him. That night, as the last volunteers packed up and the kids curled into their new beds, Dad sat on the steps outside, watching the lights glow through the warehouse windows. "Worth it," he whispered. And for once, none of us doubted him. The shelter wasn't just a building. It was proof. Proof that even in the face of threats, sabotage, and secrets, something good could rise. Proof that sometimes a family broken by silence could come back stronger by speaking and building together. It was the happiest ending we never saw coming.